Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine. Hi, David.
Hi, Rhonda.
How's it going?
It's going great, as Tony the Tiger says. Isn't there some commercial like that?
Yeah, that ages us. Okay, well, everyone, welcome to podcast 140. This is a podcast on Ask David. And we're going to be asking David the general questions that our listeners have emailed him. And the first one is from both, a couple people asked you this. Jose and Bree both asked, how do you treat hypochondria? I don't know how to say it. Hypochondria.
I thought it was hypochondriasis, but they call it hypochondria. And I looked it up on the web, on the internet, and apparently they're calling it hypochondria right now.
Right, because Jose said he's currently reading your book on panic attacks, and he wants to know, how would you treat hypochondria with TEAM, Team CBT? And Bree said, I love listening to your podcast. Thank you so much for all the valuable help and information. I tried finding a show on health, anxiety, or hypochondria, and didn't find much. Will you do a show on that? Thank you. Shall I read the others?
No, just okay. Those two, and then we'll answer this one, then we'll go on to some of the others.
Okay.
The hypochondria or health anxiety, it's called all different kinds of things, but what it really means is that some people, when you get upset about something, kind of push it out of conscious awareness, and then it comes out indirectly as a symptom. Now, many people, it comes out as anxiety, and we're going to do that in tonight's Tuesday group at Stanford. It's called the hidden emotion model, that you might get panic attacks or OCD symptoms or generalized anxiety, or a phobia could suddenly emerge because you're upset about something that you're not admitting to yourself, something in the here and now. And you sweep it under the rug, maybe because you think you're not supposed to be upset about that thing. And then it comes out indirectly as the fear of dying of cancer, or, believing you have some dreadful illness or other. And I'm familiar with this, and I love this problem. Now, by the way, so one of the... I'm stammering like that podcast host I used to have, Rhonda. But because we're going to deal with that in, I guess, the future podcast, performance anxiety.
Right.
But I'm familiar with this because I've experienced this health anxiety personally. I used to treat it a lot and learned a lot about it when I was a medical student at Stanford. I'll tell about some of those cases. And I've treated it all the time in my adult psychiatric work, working with people with anxiety. A lot of them have this fear that they have some terrible disease or other, which they don't have.
Well, one of my closest friends is a GI doctor, and he said if people didn't have hypochondria or hypochondriasis, he would lose 1/3 of his patients.
That's right. And that's true of all internal medicine doctors, what I discovered at Stanford. In fact, when I was a medical student, I worked with Alan Barber. I was a terrible medical student, which is a story for another day. But the one thing I loved was Dr. Alan Barber, and he was the head of outpatient medicine. And people came from all over the Western United States who couldn't be cured by other doctors for this or that symptom. I've probably talked about this already on the podcast. I'm so elderly and demented, I can't even remember what stories I've told anymore. But at any rate, it was so great because none of these patients pretty much had a real medical illness. They'd come with dizziness or belly pain or something that no one could diagnose. And then it always turned out they were upset about something they weren't dealing with. And Dr. Barber just gently helping them bring to conscious awareness what they weren't dealing with, was curative for just huge numbers of these patients. Not all. Some of them just wouldn't accept the fact that they didn't have a medical disease, but a good 50% of them recovered completely.
50%? Wow.
Yeah, again, I probably told this story. Well, throw caution to the wind and tell it again. It was like one patient I saw was this fellow, and he came for dizziness, and he had been to 20 doctors for 8 years to find out why he was dizzy, and no one could diagnose this, and they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical tests of his arteries in his brain and the arteries in his heart, visualization studies, and no one could find out, and so I worked him up and couldn't find anything wrong. Looked through, he brought this thick chart, and then I went and presented out in the hall to Dr. Barber, who was the attending, the head of the clinic, and then he came in to see the fellow. And I just know I've told this story somewhere. Well, forgive me if I'm repeating. But at any rate, he started listening to his heart and lungs. But he knew already there was nothing wrong with the guy's heart and lungs. So, elderly fellow. And then Dr. Barber, while pretending to listen to his heart, said, listen, Jimmy, can you remember what you were doing when the dizziness came on? He says, oh, yeah, Doc, I can remember. Do you remember the story?
I do.
Was it on a podcast?
No.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't one of the classes.
But, okay. And Jim said, yeah, I can remember. And Dr. Barber says, well, where were you? What was going on? And he says, oh, I was at my wife's funeral, Doc. And Dr. Barber said, oh, gosh, I'm sorry to hear that you lost your wife. And he explained that she died suddenly, unexpectedly, of a pulmonary embolism or some catastrophic sudden death. And Dr. Barber said, oh, you must have grieved tremendously. And he says, no, Doc, I didn't. And he was just like kind of shaking, looked on the verge of tears. And Dr. Barber said, well, why not? It must have been a devastating loss. And he says, well, I didn't know if I was supposed to cry. And I've just kind of been holding it in. And then Dr. Barber said, well, I think you need to let it out, Jimmy. And then the guy started sobbing right there and just cried for several minutes, just sobbing as he was shaking, and his hands were in his head. His head was in his hands, and he was just, tears were rolling down his cheeks. And then after, then he pulled himself together and he says, Doc, thank you, Doc. He says, I'm not dizzy anymore. I think I've been cured. And that was it. And he didn't need any medical interventions. He didn't need any psychiatric interventions. It's just that he had a problem that he wasn't dealing with, that he was sweeping under the carpet. And I see this all the time in patients with health anxiety. A young student, when I was in Penn, just to disguise it a little bit, had been going to doctors for cancer and this and that and the other thing since she was 12 years old, and always thinking that she had this disease or that disease, and no one had been able to help her. And so with one of my colleagues, she agreed to let us hypnotize her, and then I told her that she would. I brought her to a safe spot where she'd feel totally protected. And then I said, now, the reason you've got this health anxiety is because there's something bothering you that you're not bringing to conscious awareness. And you're going to see a movie screen here on the fence. She was in her backyard, and when we hypnotized her, that made her feel safe. She had her shoes off, and you're going to see on the screen what's upsetting you. The thing that you can't bring to conscious awareness. As soon as you can see it, wiggle your finger. And then she said, oh, I can see the screen. And then she wiggled her finger, and I said, well, what do you see? And she said, oh, now I know what I've been upset about. I'm 45 years old, and I married the wrong guy.
Oh, my goodness. And
she started crying, and then I said, I'm going to count to 3, and then you're going to wake up. And And if you want, you can tell us why you married the wrong guy, and we can see what to do about it. And woke her up and said, you'll be feeling great, and all like that. And said, now, if you like, you can tell us what the issue is. And then she talked about a sexual problem that they were having. And, she was a Penn student, and this was a fellow she was going with, and she'd been too shy to tell him. And then we just gave her the suggestion, here's how you might talk to him about it. And she was very open to that. She wasn't afraid to talk to him. She just kind of couldn't bring to conscious awareness that was the thing. And, it was kind of forbidden territory. And she came back the next week and she was cured of, 12 or 9 years of failed therapy for OCD and health anxiety. And she talked to him and told him, here's what I like and here's what I don't like. And they had a great talk, and she decided to go ahead and get engaged. Wow. And she was just as happy as can be. But now I've seen that in myself, too. I'll get upset about something, and I can't remember what I'm upset about. And then I'll suddenly think I'm dying of cancer or something.
Didn't that happen when you were taking your boards?
Yeah, that happened right before my board exams. I thought I had a lymphoma in my armpit. And I even went to the emergency room and forced them to give me x-rays, which weren't indicated. And they kept telling me there's nothing in your armpit. And then they said, are you upset about anything? And then I remembered my oral boards were coming up in a week, and I was really scared. And I'd been carrying a heavy suitcase on a trip to London, and I'd pulled a muscle, and I could feel pain in it all made sense all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. Now, that's just one of the 50 techniques I use. But it's the most important technique in dealing with health anxiety. We could do a whole half-a-day workshop on, 20 patients with health anxiety, but it always seems to boil down to this. I don't mean to minimize the importance of the other techniques, the daily mood log and empathy and the whole team shebang, but that's often an important component.
Great. Let's ask the question that Christian sent an email in. Christian sent in an email asking, how would you treat an abuse survivor? I've heard that talk therapy is inadequate for healing trauma. He said, hello, Dr. Burns. Thank you so much for all you do. Your work has helped so many millions of people and is really an outstanding contribution to the well-being of humanity. I'm sure your name will be listed among the greats like Freud, Jung, etc., even though your contributions are even more valuable. I was just wondering, how would you go about treating an abuse survivor who's experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder? It is my understanding that talk therapy is inadequate for healing trauma. This is supposedly because the traumatic stress is actually stored as a somatic memory in the physical body, the limbic system in the mammalian brain, which is below the level of cognition. Thank you so much for any clarification you can provide, Christian. And of course, all of these names have been changed.
Yeah, well, a great question, and thank you, Christian, for the kind compliments as well. It always touches me when people say nice things. Fabrice and I, and now Rhonda, are doing like these podcasts for free because we love teaching, and we think we've discovered something exciting, and that we want to spread the gospel, so to speak. And when you tell us that you like what we're doing, it sure means a lot. I was thinking about this fabulous question when I was jogging, and there's two kinds of trauma roughly. There's trauma where just something awful happens, like if you've heard the podcast with Marilyn, right? That she had just been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and was incredibly depressed. And then I think by the time this podcast comes out, we'll have published our work with Sherry.
Yes, we will.
And she had another horrible traumatic event. Her husband nearly died right in front of her eyes, and her father had died right in front of her eyes, and she had a year of anxiety between 75 and 100% the whole time. And in both of these cases, they recovered in a single talk therapy session using team therapy. And we're even going to show you the follow-up with Sherry in a couple of weeks too, the 2 or 3 year follow-up following that.
Yes, that will be exciting.
Thing. And so our experience has been for trauma survivors, team therapy is incredibly effective. And then why then do people say that talk therapy isn't effective? Well, it occurred to me why they do say that, because their talk therapy skills suck. so they've never seen this.
Right.
But to me, it's kind of irritating and arrogant in the extreme to say, because they're not getting good experience with talk therapy, because they don't have good skills, that somehow this isn't an effective treatment. I've treated like 30, 40, 50 patients. I'm even working up my data, and I've mentioned this on podcasts, and I'm seeing in a single 2-hour session typically 90% or greater reduction in symptoms of people. But these are very sophisticated techniques that we use that aren't easy to learn, and most therapists sadly don't yet know how to do team therapy. Now, the other category of abuse is when or trauma is when you've been abused by someone, and we'll also try to get a podcast on that as well. Actually, my experience with people who've been abused by someone is they recover exactly as quickly as trauma that's not due to abuse, just using team therapy. And we'll see if we can talk about some of those cases on a podcast, or maybe even one of them will give me permission to, like the woman who had been raped and beaten for 30 years. I have the beautiful recording of that session.
Or the woman who was raped at a bridal shower.
Oh, that one too, yes, in Whistler that I showed.
That was incredible.
Yeah, and it was just the most amazing total recovery in a single session. Maybe she would give permission to. I don't think she wants to have the video shown, but maybe she'd allow us to play the audio. But thank you for that, incredibly important question. And I would say also, Christian, that when you're treated by a human being, and there's kind of two kinds of psychotherapy, I guess I would say. One is what I call formulaic therapy, where you learn like a formula. Like if you want to treat people with aerobic exercise, well, I can teach you how to do that kind of therapy, and I can teach you in 1 minute. Just say to your patients, I recommend that you exercise daily. And now we're done with your training. You can go and call yourself a psychotherapist who uses exercise. But that's only going to have a placebo effect. That the studies show that if you give someone a placebo or you give them exercise or psychotherapy, they all come out about the same. It's not.
Isn't there real data about exercise alleviating depression?
Well, sure, everything alleviates depression. Everything in the United States at this time. The Buddha said that 2,500 years ago. You can read it right up there in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Anything that people believe in will have a placebo effect. That means maybe 35%, 45% of patients will improve. But you have to outperform that in order to be a real effect. And nothing so far has outperformed that. No form of psychotherapy, exercise doesn't, meditation doesn't, nothing, pills do, the so-called antidepressants don't, nothing significantly outperforms placebo. We're hoping the team will, and we need a good outcome study to see if that is true. But the point I'm trying to make is that in team, you're learning the skill of being a human being, the skill of being an effective therapist. It's not a formula.
Absolutely not.
And it takes a lot of training. So you have to be careful when people go around to saying, oh, this works and this doesn't work, that they may be talking about their own personal experience and their own skill level.
Yeah. Sometimes that can be scary.
Was that okay? Was that answer okay?
I think that was okay. I think it would be a really interesting topic for an entire podcast.
Yeah.
Ted asked if there's such a thing as healthy euphoria. And what do you think about that?
Well, I do. I mean, that's what I'm trying to bring about in psychotherapy. Did you get any euphoria today?
I did get euphoria.
Yeah. And
that was because David and I did some personal work, which you're going to hear about in a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
We haven't published it yet. Yeah. And I feel really happy. But, that kind of goes along with what Hillary wrote about the treatment of mania.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a healthy euphoria and the treatment of mania?
Yeah. Well,
or she's asked at least some interventions. What are some interventions to utilize during and leading up to this phase of a bipolar disorder?
in bipolar, well, those are two related questions. First, on the healthy euphoria, that's what I do try to bring about in therapy, not just for people to feel a little less depressed or a little less anxious, but have the symptoms totally obliterated and then actually go into an elevated state of joy and transcendence, and you can call it the spiritual enlightenment if you like. And it isn't always possible, but in my experience, it usually happens. Now, what's the difference between healthy euphoria? And of course, it doesn't last forever. The enlightenment isn't permanent. You have to do relapse prevention training. But hypomania, see, there's mania and hypomania. A full-blown mania is a psychotic condition called bipolar I disorder, and that's where people have psychotic episodes into the high range as well as severe depressions, like they don't need much sleep at night, they talk nonstop, they're distractible. It's like a personality change that's dramatic. And then then they'll cycle from this euphoric, psychotic state where they think they're great, they can accomplish anything, they spend money recklessly, people can notice that there's something abnormal, a sudden change in the person. The only patient I ever rejected in my whole life that I can recall was a physician who came to me for treatment in Philadelphia. He was a new patient, and when I went out to the waiting room to meet him, he was throwing things against the wall and screaming, and he was manic and absolutely out of control. And I said, "You've got to go into the hospital, and if you don't, I'll call the police and have them bring you over involuntarily to be evaluated." Because he was just.
And did he go to the hospital?
Yeah, he was hospitalized. I never actually saw him again, but he did get into the hospital, which is where he needed to be. But hypomania is a very controversial thing. It's like a milder version where you get kind of euphoric, but not to the degree that you have to be hospitalized. And but it's still a question is, and a lot of famous people are hypomanic. That they're very driven and they're constantly putting out energy. Some of our politicians are like that. I won't name any names.
But I can imagine artists or professional singers or musicians could be hypomanic.
They could be if they're really driven to be working 18 hours a day. And, but it's complicated there because they're taking drugs a lot. Oh. And this has to be something that's not.
Yeah, no, I wasn't thinking about drugs. I wasn't thinking about drugs.
Well, no, but musicians often are, that's how they survive on the road. But it's mania that's not brought on by drugs or alcohol. But the symptoms of, are you needing less sleep? It's not do you have insomnia, but do you need less sleep? Or maybe you think you only need 2 or 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And are you talking nonstop? Or are you spending money recklessly, doing things that seem to be poor judgment? Like I had a fellow, he would start getting manic, and he would start smoking and get hypersexual and be meeting women and say, let's drive to California together, and crazy stuff like that. And you can have like a milder version of that where it's not actually causing problems in the person's life, and they're just more driven than general. How do I treat bipolar? I haven't treated it for years. I used to run the lithium clinic at the VA hospital in Philadelphia. So I had tons of bipolar patients, and in those days we were just treating them with medications, lithium and other meds if needed. And that was not very effective, sadly. When I learned cognitive therapy, I had much better outcomes with manic patients. And when they got manic, I still used medications to keep them from having to go into the hospital, something sedative to cool them off really fast. Plus raising the lithium dose. But what really helped them was helping them with the depressed phase, because most of them had this perfectionism, thinking they had to be so great and perceived perfectionism. to be loved, that they had to do great things. And so a lot of them were high achievers, but it was this conditional self-esteem that caused their depression, maybe triggered the mania too. And when they learned unconditional self-esteem, that you don't have to be perfect. It's okay to be a podcast host and stutter and make mistakes, and David makes mistakes all the time. And once you accept yourself, you love yourself, in spite of your flaws. Your self-love, your self-acceptance is a gift. It's not something that you can earn in any way. Mm-hmm. And it was hard for them to learn. I mean, they all used a different one of the 50 techniques to suddenly have this dawn on them that it's okay to be human. But that seemed to be the thing that they really loved and appreciated. And when I for the 25 years that I was in private practice, I only had one patient that ever needed hospitalization, and he only needed one. He had 17 before he came to me.
Wow.
And I just had much better outcomes because of the good psychotherapy. I also think in treating mania, there has to be a great admiration between the patient and the therapist.
A strong therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, even to the point of liking one another, mm-hmm. and trusting. And that just seemed to me to be very important with every patient, and the work we're about to do, that we did today, that'll be produced in a few weeks.
Yep.
But it's even more important with bipolars. And I just liked them all a great deal. And they could tell that. And they really liked me. And then they trusted me to tell me when they were getting manic, because they knew we were on the same team. And then I'd say, well, let's raise the lithium. I'm going to give you Thorazine for a few days, or Melorel or something to bring you down so you won't have to go into the hospital. Let's meet every day. And then we can prevent a hospitalization. And they
I'm
did
surprised
fight
to hear
me.
you talk about prescribing medications, because you're so, in other times you've talked about your dislike for medications.
Well, yeah, the medications are not as good as what they're cracked up to be. But
it also sounds like what you're saying is that there are certain diagnoses or symptoms that people experience.
If someone's bipolar, they're going to have a med, because you can't stop mania with psychotherapy. That's like trying to stop a freight train with a feather. You need powerful medications, but you also need the therapeutic relationship to make that a collaborative teamwork thing rather than some coercive battle. And that's what
you're talking about, the therapeutic alliance, because it's a collaborative experience. It's collaborative working together.
Yeah.
And they have to trust you that when you say something kind of that sounds scary to me, you'll have to take Thorazine for 3 or 4 days, then I would really need to trust you before I did that.
Absolutely. And say, I don't like prescribing Thorazine either, but I don't want to see you get in the hospital.
Yeah.
Or Melorel, and 2 or 3 days of it is not going to be dangerous.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be keeping you on it either. But you've got a big reputation, you've got a big career. Let's not blow it.
Right.
And I'll go with you every step of the way. Mm-hmm. And I think the first psychiatric patient I ever saw was a bipolar man. That's maybe why I've always liked bipolars. I was just new on the ward, and they said, here's your first patient. And he was in leather restraints on a gurney. You know, mania can kill. In the early days, people used to die of dehydration from mania. It was common. And
they die from dehydration?
Yeah, from
because
not taking
too busy
fluids,
to drink
and there's some
water?
electrolyte imbalance. Mm-hmm. But this guy was in leather restraints, and he was being fed intravenously. Mm. And the poor guy, he was an engineer, an aeronautical engineer. He designed aircrafts, and there was a crash in Alaska. And somehow he thought that it was because of some engineering error he'd made. I don't think that was true. I think that was a psychotic delusion. And he was actually he thought he was at the crash site. He was hallucinating.
Wow.
But the moment I saw him and looked at him, I said, I like this guy. And the moment he looked at me, I could see that he liked me.
Yep.
And we formed an instant
alliance. Instant connection.
Yeah. And then we got him out of the hospital pretty fast, brought him down, and then he was one of my first outpatients of my career, and I just felt so close to the guy, and he just did great. And so I've always...
since you were talking about hallucinations, let's just segue into Dan, who sent an email that said, what are your thoughts on LSD in the treatment of depression and anxiety?
Well, you and I were talking about this earlier. Now, when I was a medical student, we had access to Sandoz LSD, which was given out by the CIA.
Wow.
At the Veterans Hospital in Menlo Park was where they were doing their experiments. And Vic Lovell and Ken Kesey, both of whom I knew in the 60s. Got to know Vic Lovell well. He was, Kesey's book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was dedicated to Vic Lovell.
Oh, wow.
And that book took place at the Philadelphia VA hospital. That was the setting. The Palo Alto.
Oh, the Palo Alto one.
Yeah. But they got this LSD. They volunteered to be subjects for this research at Menlo Park, and then it was like some kind of mind control thing that the CIA was trying to do, and then they thought, hey, this is great stuff, so they started giving it out. So I took it on several occasions, but and it was kind of cool. But then I had one bad trip, and I started thinking I was like the worst human being in the world, and I was thinking about how horrible the universe was. And I just think about things you don't think about. Like there's killing going on all over the earth by animals are ripping others to shreds, and humans are doing horrible things. And I got to think.
I think currently people are trying, there's a resurgence of using LSD with.
Well, I think it's good. I thought it was awful when they demonized it, and I'm glad they're doing good research on it, and it's interesting. I just doubt it's going to be helpful for depression. We did some work with a fellow recently who went all the way to Peru to take that ayahuasca, whatever it is. It's just a psychedelic plant, and he had a fabulous trip and then went back a second time and had a terrible, horrible trip, and now he has PTSD from it. Oh. And I just doubt, personally, I'm sorry, I knocked my microphone. I'm not against it at all. I thought it was a very interesting drug. At least it does something. Antidepressants just don't even do anything except go into your brain and have side effects. And of course, a placebo effect. But this is something real that might tell us a lot about consciousness and brain function and stuff like that. But I'm skeptical it's going to make it as an antidepressant, and if it does, I say God bless. Let's give out magic mushrooms. But I just think that the potential for negative thinking is too great, because depressed patients already think they're the worst person in the world, and I'm afraid for some it could potentiate it. Maybe trigger a suicidal impulse. Who knows? But I'm just speculating right now. I don't have the data.
I don't know if you know the author Ayelet Waldman. She's married to Michael Chabon, and she wrote an article about how she had severe depression. She was treated by I don't know who treated her, but she was treated by LSD, and she felt like it helped her.
Oh, it could. It absolutely. I mean, it's amazing what happens. It's beyond words. It's so amazing. And I remember when we were taking it, we would think about like the Bible and spiritual people, great Buddhas and Jesus and Moses and all these people. And we would just laugh because it seems so superficial compared with what we were experiencing. Yeah. It's like we were really into what is the pure spiritual experience. It's what it really seemed like. And so I thought it was a good thing. And when I later, as a father, found out my kids had taken it, and they kind of confessed shamefully to me that they'd taken LSD. I said, "Oh, I'm so proud of you. Tell me, what was your trip like? I can't wait to hear." But I'm not promoting it or recommending it. It's just that I have a tremendous respect for it, and I think it's the potential there has been untapped. But as a practical treatment
there's
tool,
not enough research about it.
Well, I think we need more research, and it's something amazing about it, but maybe not on average going to be a good depression treatment. But if I'm wrong, then I hope I'm wrong.
Okay, well, I think we have time for one more question, and this is from Jim, who said, "I think I have ADHD, but some doctors claim it's not a true diagnosis. What do you think?"
Well, let me say that this is very controversial, and I'll be quick because our time is real short right now, and we'll make this our last question. But the people take symptoms that humans have, and they call it a brain disorder. Now, we all get distractible at times, We all get impulsive at times. We all get hyperactive at times. And those are distributed as a bell-shaped curve, if you know what that is in the population. Some people are more distractible. I know when I went to Amherst College, and I would go to lectures, I couldn't grasp what they were talking about. Never once. I had no idea. And then after the class, I would ask another student, what were they trying to tell me? And then the other student would say, oh, they were just trying to talk about blah, blah, blah. I'd say, oh, I get it now. But I couldn't get it on my own. And so you say, well, okay, I was distractible. I didn't have a good capacity at that time for taking in, a lecture. And over time, I got...
You got better at that?
Got better at it. But they're just problems that humans have. But when you say, oh, you have a brain disease called major depressive episode or social anxiety disorder or ADHD, you've attached a label to it and claimed that there's some kind of a brain dysfunction.
Right, because what else Jim said was that, he's 55 years old.
Yeah.
And from his own so it's not like he's a child who's not performing well at school
Sure.
or has other problems.
Yeah.
His own non-professional opinion is that he thinks he has ADHD.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people love the diagnosis because it explains, you don't blame yourself anymore. You say, oh, I have a brain dysfunction. But I don't think there's any, to me, impressive evidence that it is a brain dysfunction. It's just a problem that people have, and it can be treated very well with cognitive therapy. There's been a lot of research in adults and kids that it can be very helpful. Now, of course, you can take a medication called Adderall. Now, you know what Adderall is?
Amphetamine?
Yeah, dexedrine. It's just one step down from methadone, which is the most toxic of all narcotics. You see these people with losing their teeth, and they're 35 and they look like they're 65.
Yep.
They're speed freaks. That's a slang name, but they're methadone addicts. Well, that's what Adderall is. It's almost as potent as methadone. And if you give me some Adderall, you'll have a podcast like you've never heard. It's going to be fantastic. But do we want to just give everyone then Adderall?
No.
I mean, the Nazis gave it to the pilots in World War II, the kamikaze pilots, because it made them more violent.
The Japanese?
Yeah, the Japanese. What did I say?
You said the Nazis.
Oh, no, the Japanese. Uh-huh. Yeah. They're the ones from Japan, right?
Yeah. Well, kamikaze pilots,
Yeah, they're Japanese, yeah. And so I think 99% of the time or 90% of the time you can solve the problem without taking drugs or narcotics. But it's a question. It's a social question. I don't know the answer to it. I was just kind of shocked when I discovered that our society has approved of the treatment of hyperactivity or inattention with dexedrine. I thought it was some real medication. I didn't know they'd just taken, a narcotic and given it a new name and called it a medicine. Does it work? Well, I when I was a medical student, they gave out Dexamyl pills. You could get them from friends and stuff. It was dexedrine plus some barbiturate, amylbarbital or something. It was an upper and a lower.
Oh, wow.
And they were given for weight loss. But people said, oh, if you want to study, take some of these. So I got some, and I just hated pathology. I couldn't understand it. So I went into the library and with a bunch of these pills and got a pathology textbook, and I looked at it. And it was like the most amazing thing in the world. It was like I could memorize it as I was going along. It gave me this incredible, concentration. But then I talked to one of my advisors, and he says, well, it's state-dependent learning. If you don't take the pill when you take the test, you won't be able to remember the stuff, and you really want to be doing this. So I didn't keep up with it. But it certainly causes fantastic ability to concentrate. But so do steroids make athletes more powerful, like Barry Bonds and others, and great hand-eye coordination. It's a social question. Do we want to be using those kinds of medications? Is there a downside? And the answer is yes. And how do we balance that out? But that's about the extent of my babbling. And since time is short, why don't we
Okay, well, thank you so much. And next week is going to be another Ask David, but it's going to be focused on the 5 secrets and relationships.
And some of you, if your 5 secrets, or if your questions, Ask David questions haven't been answered yet, we've still got some tremendous ones stored up here. And I greatly appreciate your writing in these questions. We'll address more later.
Okay, well, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you, David. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.